Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is all about ways that you can improve your bench press from the perspective of a woman. Now, while this is from my perspective as a woman, it's not just advice for other women to take. Anyone who does or does not identify as a woman can use these tips that I have, which there's 5 total, in order to try and increase your bench press. The first tip that I have is to make the actual bench press work for you. The traditional setups that they have at the gym don't always work best for your particular bench press because of your leverages or just the way that the bench is. If we're talking about from a competitive point of view, the first tip that I have is to put bands down. You'll see in a lot of my training videos that we put bands down on the bench press, and that's because commercial gyms have really slippery benches, especially when you compare them to competition benches. So we'll put these bands down in order for us to dig our shoulders in a little bit better. The other tip that I have that kind of goes along with this is the benches in gyms tend to be a lot narrower than the ones in competition. Competition benches are wider. So if you have a set of bench presses to choose from, try and pick the one that's a little bit wider so that it mimics a competition bench more closely. And the other thing is you're not falling off one side or the other, especially if you have broader shoulders. The next tip that you can use is putting like a yoga mat down if you don't necessarily have bands. That can also kind of fake increase the width of the bench and then give you some more leverage, and then also give you a little bit more height. Speaking of height, sometimes people can't get their feet underneath them, especially if they're really short. And most federations allow you to put like a plate or a board or something underneath your feet so that you can get a little bit more leg drive. So depending on how tall or how short the bench is that you use, this may be something that you want to utilize. See if it helps get you a little bit more leg drive. The next thing to consider are the bars at the gyms themselves. So if you look at this example, these are 3 different bars, all for my gym. They all are 45-pound bars, but the knurling and the smooth parts are different from bar to bar. This is important because if you say, oh, I put my ring finger on the non-knurling, well, that's going to be a different position depending on which bar you use. So it's important to feel your setup more than know exactly where the rings are. And then depending on what bar they use at your competitions, it may change even then. The last one when talking about making the bench press work for you is to mess with rack height. So one problem that I always had is that I have really short arms, so when I went to unrack the bench press, I would end up coming up and out of my position. So in some gyms, I actually had to pull a bench into the squat rack and bench off of there. And this is really great because if you look at the bottom, the spacing in between each rack height is minuscule towards the bottom. And that's because they know that when you're putting something that low, you're most likely benching, and those tiny increments can make a huge difference. The second major tip that I'm going to give is about training, and this is by changing your frequency and your volume of lifting. So frequency being how many times a week you're lifting, and volume being how much total weight you end up lifting every week. So if you start out, it's totally fine to bench once a week, especially as you get used to the movement, as you improve your technique, and then as you get used to what is fatiguing for you or not. As you get a little bit more advanced in training, you can add additional bench days. These don't have to be strict bench press days, you can do variations, but adding more days that you're benching is going to increase your volume as well as your frequency. So there's a lot of talk about like daily undulating progression, where you have like a strength day, a hypertrophy day, a power day. If you want to keep it pretty simple, the way that I like to think of it is if we're saying, for example, having 2 days where we're benching. The first day is going to be like a 5x5, something that is pretty light. You do 5 reps or 5 sets of 5 reps, and the goal in mind would be I could probably have done another set. Or at the end of each set, you say, I could probably have done 1 or 2 more reps, if not 3 or 4. It's not supposed to be super heavy, it's not supposed to be super taxing. It's more of like a hypertrophy day, even though it's not technically a hypertrophy rep scheme. On the next day, which isn't the next, is a few days down the road, you can do something like a 3x3, meaning 3 sets of 3 reps. And this is gonna be a little bit heavier, a little bit closer to your training max. And this is going to be, something that when you're done with your 3rd set and your 3rd rep, you think, I maybe could do 1 more set. Maybe I could add a 4th rep in each of those, but I'm not entirely confident that that's something I could do. And this is a good way to kind of play around with your volume. while adding extra days and still keeping things exciting. You don't have to do things like pyramids and drop sets if you don't like them. There's really no evidence that it's any better than, just traditional linear or training. But if you find it interesting, if it keeps you in the gym, there's no problem doing it. The last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to women in particular in the bench press is that you can lift at a much higher frequency than men can. There's one study in particular that once I find, I'm going to link below. I heard it on Greg Nuckols talking about it on a podcast. But basically what they did is they took women and they said, okay, perform your 1 rep maximum bench press. So that's the heaviest bench that you can do. And then they did the same in men. And then they tested that 1 rep max again, 4 hours, 8 hours, 24 hours, etc. later. They found that men could do that 1 rep max, on one day, and then a day and a half, maybe 2 days later, they could hit it again. Women could hit it 4 hours later. So our recovery is a little bit higher. There's some argument if that's just because we're not moving the same amount of weight that men are, but regardless, most of us are gonna fall into this category where we recover fairly quickly from something like a bench press. So increasing our frequency of lifting is not going to be super taxing to the point where it may cause issues. Now, as always, play with it, see what works best for you. If twice a day benching is adequate for you, do that. If you want something a little bit more like the 4 to 5 times a week, which people do, then give that. So my third tip is gonna seem kind of strange coming from me because it's a little bit product pushy, but microplates. So microplates are tiny little plates that are like 1 pound, half pound, quarter pound increments that you can buy online. The reason this is important because if you think about someone who is benching, at the beginning and they're lifting like 50 pounds, for example. Going from 50 pounds to 55 pounds, which is the next, plate that you can add on, is a 10% increase in how much weight you're actually lifting. An example of this would be someone who benches 300 pounds, suddenly going to 330 pounds with nothing in between. They're both 10% increases. So these microplates allow you to slowly increase your weight. Another thing that I've noticed personally is that there are plenty of women who can bench press 130 pounds for like 8 or 9 reps, but can't bench press 135. Whether it's a confidence thing, whether it's just the way that we are, having these microplates lets you get closer and closer to that one plate or that next weight up without, consistently just failing a lift, failing a lift, failing a lift. And the other reason that it's really helpful is those of us who are like in America and use pounds and then compete in international competitions or in federations that use kilos, you can get pretty close to the kilo equivalents, which is really important because if you're trying to really hone in on your training and you want an opener that you really, really feel confident in, these microplates can get you a lot closer to what that is. The fourth tip is to grow certain muscle groups. And these muscle groups in particular are going to be your lats, your shoulders, and your triceps. So a lot of people think that the bench press is all about your chest and all about your pecs, so they'll do a lot of accessory movements for the pectorals, but there are other muscles that are extremely important, especially if you're doing a competition bench, because when we arch, we're simulating more of a decline bench, because that's going to be a stronger lift for us than an actual flat bench press. The other thing is we use things like leg drive, so we really do need to build up these other muscle groups. So things that are going to increase your latissimus dorsi, your lats, your back, your shoulders, and this is important for shoulder health too, because doing things like mobility exercises, strengthening exercises of those smaller muscles are going to be really important for long-term shoulder health, and no one wants a rotator cuff injury. And then triceps, because as you're pressing, you actually do use a fair amount of your triceps. The fifth and final tip is all about adding accessory movements that are variations of the bench press itself. Some good examples are I use things like long pause bench, and in competition you do pause at the bottom, wait for the command to press, but doing more of like a 2-second, 3-second pause, pin presses. So I didn't put any weight on the bar for this example so you could see, but I usually use a weight a little bit heavier than my training weight, and this is where you set the safeties right where your sticking point is, and so you're powering up through your sticking point. There are a lot of other accessories that you can do that people like, pausing at different parts of the movement while you're through your press, putting a little block or something on your chest so that you're not doing full range of motion, and pausing like an inch off your chest and then pressing. All of these are great variations that are going to help assist your overall lift. And these can be added in as well, instead of, say, you're not comfortable benching twice a week, but you do a competition bench press once a week and then do a pause bench press the second session of the week, there you go. There's your volume, there's your variation, and especially if you like to train your sticking points, some of these can be really helpful. And I do have one last thing to say about the bench press if you're planning on competing. If you're planning on competing in a federation where your feet have to be flat on the ground, in America this is like USAPL, don't bench in Chucks. Chucks are great shoes. I used Chucks for like the first 2 years that I powerlifted before I ever bought like squat shoes or any of those raised heel shoes. But when you have a flat-footed bench, if you look at the way Chucks are, the toe kind of raises a little bit. And so some judges may call you on not being flat-footed. So keep that in mind when you are bench pressing at a competition, is that maybe not using a shoe where the tip of the shoe comes up a little bit, because you don't want to get called on something like that. As always, if you have any questions, leave them below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.